You want to see a hyperfixation gone wild?
Hello, my name is Fred and I really like killer whales. I'm about to info dump on everything Orca and Orca related that you see in the map behind me for as long as you'll listen to me. Let's start with the big three Orcas populations of this area: the residents, the transients, and the offshores. Resident killer whales, fish eaters. Very, very social community of orcas, usually go large groups. That's the first one. The second one, transient killer whales. Those are marine mammal eaters. They'll eat seals, sea lions, porpoises. You get the gist. The next one is the offshores. The offshores, they eat sharks. They're usually called offshores because they're usually offshore. And they only come every so often, so you don't see them all that often. That being said, there are two populations of resident killer whales specifically in this area. There are southern residents. There's a group about 74 at the moment. They usually hang from about halfway through Vancouver Island all the way south down to California. And the northern residents usually hang from about halfway up to Vancouver Island north. That being said, the northern residents do move down far south. I saw them over on Bowen Island not that long ago. I think it was a month or two. And the southern residents will make their way all the way up Campbell River, sometimes even further. Now, how do we know that there's multiple kinds of killer whales in this area? Because back in the 70s, when they were capturing orcas, this was the place where orca captivity began, they needed to know how many there were. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans in Canada specifically started out with thinking about okay, we are usually, we're not usually, but now we're capturing these orcas, and we need to have a count so that we know that we can capture them sustainably. It's a sustainable fisheries source. That's the reason why in the States right now, the killer whales that are in captivity are under NOAA, because it's the Department of Agriculture. Well, they're solid as property, right? And so they needed to be able to understand them as a stock. The person who did that up in Canada was a guy named Michael Bigg. The DFO called him out and was like, we need to figure out just how many orcas there were, because in the 60s and the 70s, they didn't know that there was different populations, let alone how many approximate orcas there are. So he came up with the identification system, had a census where everybody mailed in, basically got everybody along the coast, gave them a sheet of paper that said, on August X, since 1971, 72, 73, 74, he did this for a few years, if you see a killer whale, write down how many there were, the date, where you saw them, what you're reading. They didn't ask me what you're reading. But the idea is to get all of the information from people along the coast that were on the water trying to watch, to get a gist of how many there were up and down. He ended up figuring out not that long after that you could use photo identification to identify these killer whales over long periods of time. Now, that is monumental, because it means that you don't need to have a tracker on any individual orca. He ended up cutting into one's dorsal fin in order to make sure that the notches would stay and stuff like that, to test and confirm the hypothesis, but it worked. And so now we have photo identification, and people are able to identify, anybody's able to identify killer whales up and down the coast with the right tools. If you want a tool, the Orca Conservancy, which is a conservation organization out of Washington State, has a flashcard set of all of those individual ones specifically. But we're going to go back a little bit into the reason why captivity began in this area, because it actually, originally started with Vancouver. There was a guy named Murray Newman, who was the head of the Vancouver Aquarium, and he wanted a sculpture of a killer whale in the aquarium because people hated them. People were shooting at killer whales in the 60s. People who would go on to research were shooting killer whales when they were a child because that was accepted. The greater majority of orcas that went into captivity in the first 10, 15 years had bullet holes in them, not from the capture era, but fishermen and other people just absolutely hating these animals because they were the demons of the sea. So he wants that. He hires two guys to go down to Saturna Island and camp out for a few months. They ended up staying there 2 months, don't see anything. They got a harpoon gun at the end. One guy wants to shave at the end. The other guy says, nope. Tosses his shaving kit over. What do you know? There's orcas down there. They go, they harpoon it. They don't want to kill it because they see that there's some kind of thing happening where the orcas are trying to keep each other up, and they thought they were all savage beasts. Little time later, they ended up towing the whale with the harpoon in it from Saturna Island all the way to Vancouver. Stays there for 2 months. That whale is called Moby Doll. Moby Doll, thought to be a girl, actually a guy. Female, male, as they're orcas. So that ends up happening in 1964. A year later, the guy down in the Seattle Aquarium, Ted Griffin, has been trying to capture a whale for X amount of time, has been unsuccessful, ends up going up to Shamu, British Columbia, which is a little bit behind me here, but it's still part of the story of the map that exists. Buys a killer whale for $8,000 in a pillowcase and an arm wrestle, builds a makeshift pen, brings him all the way down the month and a half journey, all the way down through the little channel here, the Strait of Georgia, to Seattle in order to have him at the Seattle Aquarium. Now, that is when the first Free Willy movie gets made, which isn't a Free Willy movie, but it's called Shamu, My Best Friend, and it might as well be the origin of it, because that was what existed before Free Willy. I think it actually came out before Jason James Richter was born, crazy enough. So that actually ties into another crazy thing that exists within here, which I bet you didn't know, which is Shamu, the whale that we know from SeaWorld, started here. So Namu was a large male killer whale, and they wanted a mate for him. They wanted a friend. And so they went out and they captured a small female orca and brought him in. They didn't get along, and so they wanted to sell her off. They ended up selling her off to SeaWorld in San Diego at the time, and the guy called him up and was like, hey, we want the rights to Namu. Namu was a really big name at the time, so they were like, no, we're not going to sell that. So the business people idea that the business people came up with was the fact that they were going to call it She Namu. So Shamu, that's where it starts. There was really only one Shamu. I think there was a baby Shamu, but I haven't, like I said, I'm doing this all off the dome, so there's only so much information I can give. But that was a stage name for all of the orcas after that. Each of the orcas that have been in captivity henceforth have had specific names given. So that being said, we get into the 70s. There's 3 places up here. There's orca captivity existed. That was Vancouver Aquarium, Sealand of the Pacific down here in Victoria, and Seattle Aquarium. Sealand of the Pacific was also the first place where Tillicum was, he killed Kelty Bird. That was a very sad incident for that area. And also in early 70s, that was a little bit later, but early 70s, there was the Penn Cove capture where the greater majority of this other resident community, this was talking about like 70 to 80 whales, no, I think it was 90 at the time, was all rounded up in a place on Woodby Island at that front. Another thing about Woodby Island on here is that they have the Langley Whale Center. There are a few places throughout here where there are like orca-specific brick and mortar locations that you can go to. The Langley Whale Center is one of them. Another one you can go to is the Whale Museum on Friday Harbor in San Juan Island. There is also a like Center for Whale Research survey center kind of deal that's also in Friday Harbor. It's like right as you get off the ferry. And then if you go a little bit further up north, there's the Killer Whale Interpretive Center in Telegraph Cove. There's also a whale center in Tofino. I've walked by that, but I haven't been to that one quite yet. Okay, let's talk about actually seeing killer whales in these areas. You want to see orcas from land? Oh, you kidding me? Orca Network, this whole area covered on their Facebook page. If you go to their Facebook page, every single day, any group of orcas that shows up in this area, not only do they like have a setup and a post for where they were initially seen, but everybody will come together and organize, oh, they're going this way, oh, they're going that way. That all exists down here. That's Orca Network's Facebook page. Up in San Juan Island, you have the San Juan Island whale watching sightings group. That's for all of these areas, not just San Juan Island specifically. So that's pretty much all of Washington you got covered on that front. You go up to Vancouver, there's this little area here, a little inlet called Howe Sound. There's a Howe Sound Cetacean Sightings group, and then once you go across, you go to a place called the Sunshine Coast. That's this little peninsula you see right here that's not really a peninsula, but Sunshine Coast also has their own separate Facebook sightings group. That's the closest one from Vancouver. You can take a bus and do that. You can also do that. You can do that a lot in Seattle. There's a lot of connections there. But like Vancouver, you can take a bus, and I just wanted to make sure that you know that. Around the coast of Vancouver Island, the best place you're going to be able to see whales from land is Nanaimo. If you go to Dardanelles at any given point, as far as I'm concerned and as far as I have heard, orcas will be around there fairly consistently. When I say every day, absolutely not. Seeing orcas definitely takes a lot of effort, but if you're there, that's going to be the area to do it. Campbell River also has a lot of sightings and things like that. Campbell River also has a live stream. So the 2 places that have live streams in here is Lime Kiln and off of San Juan Island here and the Campbell River Pier. It's not, the Campbell River Pier one is just like a live stream. It's not a live stream for killer whales, whereas the Lime Kiln one is like designed specifically for that. Another live stream you have is actually up here in Orca Lab. That is a place up on Hansen Island, close to Alert Bay. So Orca Lab has all of the hydrophone networks, underwater. They have underwater live stream cameras that you can tune into at any point in time. That's explore.org and going from there. The Facebook group for over here, before I run out of time, is the Comox Valley Sightings group. The reason I'm promoting them specifically is just because they have so many Facebook group chats and otherwise up and down the area, whereas other ones are more like centrally located. And I'm starting to catch into time here, so let's go through this, like a few of the specific places where whale watches go out of. You have Vancouver proper. I have discounts for wild whales there. There's also a few down in the south closer to Richmond. There's Nanaimo, Vancouver Island Whale Watch, also have discount codes for there. And Anacortes, which is Outer Island Excursions. I have 2 times where I'm actually going out with them. You can do discount codes or come out on the 28th of June or the 21st of July. That being said, my name is Fred. I talk about killer whales. This wasn't even half of it. And if you want to hear more, stick around.